We're back and the day after Earth Day 2018. And one of the most important issues that we're dealing with as humans is what we're doing to the climate. And much of what the current president of the United States is doing can be rolled back. And in some areas, the damage done can be sort of undone to some degree. But you can't undo years of damaging our planet, the only planet that we, at least for now, have to live on. And the best analogy I can think of, sort of like a huge ocean liner or a large commercial plane that's sailing or flying in the wrong direction, the amount of time and fuel and effort to reroute it after every minute that it's going in the wrong direction grows, and in some cases grows exponentially. If a commercial airliner is off target for 15 minutes, that could potentially add 30 minutes in total to the flight time that you would have had from point A to point B if the plane had been going in the right direction from the get-go. And that effect can grow even more over time. And that's sort of an analogy for climate change, right? The amount of damage that Donald Trump and his administration will do relative to what another president might have done in a 4-year term could take us way more than 4 years to undo. And on that note, Earth Day was yesterday, April 22nd, 2018, and Donald Trump and his White House put out an Earth Day statement, really in name only. And Orwellian is really the only way that I can describe it. And what I'm referencing is George Orwell's book, 1984. That book included the terms doublethink and newspeak, and those have been sort of colloquially blended together into the term doublespeak, the idea of ambiguous speech by definition, by design, in order to be deceptive, or speech that means the opposite of what it sounds like. And that's sort of what I mean when I say that Donald Trump's Earth Day statement was Orwellian in nature, because Earth Day is supposed to be about supporting environmental protection, taking care of our planet. That's what it's been about since 1970 when it was first celebrated. This is a global event, nearly 200 countries participating, and Donald Trump's Earth Day statement celebrated the destruction that is being done to the environment by his administration. Let's take a look at a piece of that statement that was put out where the Trump administration said in the second paragraph, quote, "We also know that a strong market-driven economy is essential to protecting these resources," meaning natural earth resources. "For this reason, my administration is dedicated to removing unnecessary and harmful regulations that restrain economic growth and make it more difficult for local communities to prosper and to choose the best solutions for their environment." That's the exact opposite of the reality, right? Market-driven is what's causing the problem. Not enough regulation on industry since industrialization, right? For the last 150, 200 years, that's been the catalyst for the situation we now find ourselves in. Trump's administration has destroyed countless Obama-era environmental protection regulations, doing more damage to the environment by their removal. And Trump's EPA Director, Scott Pruitt, who, by the way, we've learned is the subject of 10 federal investigations right now. I'll tell you about that a little bit later. Trump's EPA Director, Scott Pruitt, has announced that he's going to be gutting fuel standards that were meant to cut carbon emissions. Those will be gone soon. Trump's administration has a plan to do more offshore drilling, which does more damage to the environment. So Trump's message on Earth Day is, we love the Earth, protect the Earth, I guess, which he's going to do by removing regulations and allowing industry to further destroy the planet. The Earth Day statement from Trump is the opposite of what Earth Day is supposed to be about. Or in other words, Earth Day made Trump make a statement that he's going to do exactly what Earth Day is supposed to stop. It's like a speech on, Martin Luther King Day about how the president is going to work hard to get us back to like the era of Jim Crow or something. I don't know if that's a good analogy. Or a speech on Holocaust Remembrance Day about how the president is going to finally get to the bottom of those crafty Jews controlling the banking industry. Maybe these are bad analogies. The guy seems to be saying that to have a clean environment, a safe environment, a healthy planet, corporations must thrive when corporations are the ones that have, by and large, done the economic destruction when we've left them unchecked. But I guess we have clean coal now or something, if you ask Donald Trump, totally clean, beautiful coal. And the real point I want to make here, the statement is totally Orwellian. The broader absurdity here is that we have this Earth Day thing once a year, which I support, I agree with, it's a beautiful thing, 200 countries nearly getting involved. But then we elect politicians nationwide who deny climate change altogether, or at least deny that climate change is connected to human activities. They represent us year round, and we have Earth Day once a year. It's absolutely disgusting, unconscionable, and immoral what we are doing. And at the top of the list of problems related to Earth Day is the guy running the EPA, Scott Pruitt, which is what I want to talk to you about next. Okay, I didn't think we'd be going back to the supposed P tape, a possible video recording of Donald Trump with prostitutes in Russia, possibly engaging in, or maybe just watching them engage in various sexualized, urine-related rituals. I'm really using the cleanest possible language to talk about this. But Trump's been caught in his first lie related to the supposed P tape. And I want to be super clear here, so I'm going to say this twice. I'm going to say this now, and I'm going to say it after I explain the lie. The reason this is a big deal is not because it proves that the P tape is real. The P tape may not be real. This is a big deal because it's evidence that Trump is lying about the facts related to the P tape. And Trump often has a pattern of lying about small elements of a story first, and then the disproving of those small elements leads to an understanding that it's all a big lie. Okay, so that's the disclaimer. What happened? We've now learned through various interviews given by the fired FBI director James Comey that Trump specifically wanted to convince Comey when they met that the P tape rumor wasn't true, okay? And according to Comey, Trump said a few things in sort of his defense. One is that he's a germaphobe or something along those lines. The other is that it's not possible that Trump was involved in the urine stuff with Russian prostitutes or prostitutes in Russia because he never spent a night in Moscow back in 2013 around the time of the Miss Universe pageant that was held there. This is the trip during which it supposedly happened, if it did. Trump insisted he left on a plane the same day, the same night, and that apparently implied in that is that if you're going to do urine fetish prostitute stuff in a hotel room, you'd have to do it in the middle of the night or very, very, very late at night. Now, any normal person could say, you know, it could also happen during the day, but let's stick with Donald Trump's story, which is it's not possible because he didn't stay over. Let's look at a piece of James Comey's writing about the situation, where Comey said he had spoken to people who had been on the Miss Universe trip with him, and they had reminded him that he didn't stay overnight in Russia for that. He said he arrived in the morning, did events, then showered and dressed for the pageant at the hotel. He didn't say the hotel name, and left for the pageant. Afterwards, he returned only to get his things because they departed for New York by plane that same night. So Trump's alibi, so to speak, is he didn't spend the night, he left the same day. Up until now, there was the suspicion that that's not true, that Trump actually stayed in Moscow for 2 nights, which immediately contradicts his supposed alibi. But now Bloomberg is able to disprove that claim specifically because they have the flight records. And what we have learned is that Donald Trump flew to Moscow on November 7th of 2013, not on his plane, but on a private jet owned by Phil Ruffin, who's one of Trump's business partners. That plane landed in Moscow on November 8th, accounting for the time change, the time zone difference. Later on November 8th, Trump went to eat at Nobu Moscow, the sushi restaurant Nobu Moscow. The next day, November 9th, there are Facebook posts that show Trump was at the Ritz Hotel during the day. That's already one overnight. And Trump tweeted that he had a tour of Moscow on that day. And then later, Trump went to the Miss Universe pageant itself, then went to an after party, and that after party started at 1 a.m. November 10th. So remember, Trump arrived November 8th, and he's there at least until 1 a.m. November 10th, which is almost 2 full days later. Later that night, the plane that Trump flew to Moscow in left at 4 a.m., meaning that even if Trump was on that plane, and let's assume that he was, he spent the better part of 2 full nights in Moscow. So that directly disproves Trump's story and the timeline. So let's go back to what I started with, because it's the most important thing here. I'm not saying that the fact that Trump lied about not having spent any nights in Moscow proves that the P tape is real or that the prostitute story is real, whether or not there is a video recording. It's a big deal because Trump is now lying about his supposed alibi when it comes to the P tape. And when I step back from it, I don't know what the truth is, but it's weird that there's been so much focus by Trump on the existence or non-existence of this P tape. And it's also weird that too many specifics from Trump about something that supposedly didn't happen seem to be wrong. And it's also kind of weird. I'm thinking, like, if someone came to me with this, I would just say, there's no tape because it's not something I did, period. I wouldn't say, well, you know, I'm very germophobic, so I wouldn't really get involved in urine stuff with Russian prostitutes, or, you know, the timing of it, like, it's basically a scheduling conflict, right? Like, when you say it didn't happen because I didn't overnight in Moscow, you're not saying it's something you wouldn't do. You're just saying, like, the timing didn't allow for it, which is a really weird way to defend yourself.
Yeah, I feel like there are two possibilities here. One is that it's like the one aspect of the Christopher Steele dossier that's not true.
Sure.
And Trump thought that he could easily debunk it, so that's why he wanted to zero in on that.
Yeah.
The other possibility is that pretty much everything in the Steele dossier is true, but because Trump found this to be like the most damaging to his reputation, the most salacious, the most embarrassing, he wanted to make sure that that was off the record.
There's a third possibility, which is maybe he was given wrong information about overnighting and, like, it still didn't happen, but the alibi can't be that he didn't overnight there or something like that. But the bottom line is, these are not exactly normal reactions in light of these accusations. And you know what? In the end, Hillary Clinton reportedly urinated multiple times during the 2016 presidential campaign. Comey's not talking about it. Fox News isn't. Nobody's talking about the fact that Hillary Clinton was urinating all throughout that campaign, and we're only hearing about Trump and urine. And
in the middle of the debates, no less. She would leave and not be back for the commercial break. That was so weird.
In fact, Donald Trump calling attention to it at one point. So lie confirmed about the P tape stuff. It's not actually about the P tape. It's about the fact that Trump has been caught lying again about something that a normal person would just say, I didn't do that, and there's no evidence that I did it because it didn't happen. Let's talk about a visit to the United States by French President Emmanuel Macron, who went to Washington, D.C. yesterday. First state dinner took place last night. The entire thing was a gong show from the get-go, and I'm going to get to Donald Trump's statement about his 2+ hour meeting with Macron momentarily. But just to give you first a little bit of the flavor for the endless string of bizarre faux pas, each outdoing the previous in terms of Trump's meeting with world leaders, during a photo op in the White House, Donald Trump at one point claimed to be wiping dandruff off of the shoulder of the French president. And the funniest thing, if you're watching, you'll be able to hear what Trump says, whether you're listening or watching. If you're watching, you'll also be able to observe the look on Emmanuel Macron's face when Donald Trump is doing this. And it's an amazing reaction by virtue of non-reaction. Macron sort of stone-faced with a smile, right? Like an immovable smile on his face, as Donald Trump claims to be wiping dandruff off of the French president's suit. Take a look at this. Take a listen to this.
Mr. President, they're all saying what a great relationship we have, and they're actually correct. It's not fake news. Finally, it's not fake news. So it's a great honor that you're here. But we do have a very special relationship. In fact, I'll get that little piece of dandruff off. That little piece. We have to make him perfect. He is perfect. So it is really great to be with you, and you are a special friend. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Yeah, interestingly, that was the least cringeworthy moment of the entire visit. So it only got worse from there. And they did a sort of statement after their meeting. They were sitting across from each other at a table. Mike Pence was next to Trump, and Jim Mattis, and John Bolton was on Trump's side of the table, and everything about it was just transmitting a very, very strange atmosphere. Let's go through a few clips from the meeting.
We were going to have a short little meeting, and it turned out to be a long meeting, and it could have gone on for another 2 hours. We discussed a lot of things, a lot of problems in the world, a lot of problems that we think can be solved. We've come a long way, just the two of us, I think, as understanding. We talked about Iran, we talked about Syria, we talked about a lot of subjects that really are big, hard situations, and we think we have solutions to a number of them. So we're going to continue that now, and then Emmanuel and myself will meet again, I think, after this meeting.
Right. Aside from Trump referring to them going over a number of big, hard situations, that actually, again, that's not the weirdest part of this. What's weird, I think, is sort of a couple things. Number one, there's this attitude from Trump generally that, like, he's better than Macron, right? On some level, he's a better man, he's a better person, he's more important than Macron. But also, there's this feeling like it's all sort of a bother to him. Like he's sort of, yeah, I'm doing this, and we had a meeting, we could have met longer, we talked about trade, I set the agenda, but it's all kind of like from a point of condescension, isn't it?
He's just going through the motions. He's talking a lot without saying anything. And I kind of wish I could do that too. You're just like filling the air.
Well, and what he ended up doing is just going very quickly into bragging about random things, right? So there's no real indication that he actually saw the content of the meeting with the French president as that important, because he immediately jumped into bragging about unemployment rates in different states. Take a look.
Very good numbers are coming out on our businesses. You're seeing the numbers that are getting released on our companies and our businesses. They're very strong. The economy is been really incredible. Unemployment now is at the lowest point ever in history in many states. The states were enumerated last night, late last night. The numbers came out, and we've hit the lowest unemployment numbers in many decades in some cases, and in some cases the lowest numbers, period. It was just reiterated that unemployment for African American families, it's been the best in history. For Hispanic families, the best in history. For women, the best in 18 years, and that's very close to going much higher than that. So it's really something very special, so we're very happy about that.
It's like, what is he talking about? If you're Emmanuel Macron and you're sitting there across from him, what do you make of the fact that Trump is just making absolutely no sense? And a lot of the stuff he said wasn't even true. He said we've gotten the numbers from our companies and everything's great. The Dow crashed 500 points yesterday on anticipated bad earnings numbers. Like, where is Trump getting this stuff? And it just went on like this for a while. I don't know what is going through the French president's head as this is going on. And then Trump talks about his conversation with Macron again, this time saying they talked about trade, which I'm sure they did, but it's made abundantly clear that Trump doesn't know anything about trade. Look at this.
The president and I working on trade. The trade with France is complicated because we have the European Union. I would rather deal just with France. The Union is very tough for us. They have trade barriers that are unacceptable. Our farmers can't send their product into the European Union easily as they should, and we accept their product, so we have to make a change. And they understand that, and we're negotiating, Wilbur and Steve and everybody, we're negotiating with the European Union.
Yeah, everybody's doing a great job, and then trade apparently got Trump into talking about China, where it really got strange. Take a look at this last clip.
We have no choice but to be very serious. You know, we've put on very substantial tariffs, and that will continue unless we make a trade deal. I think we've got a very good chance of making a deal. As you know, they've just stated President Xi, a terrific guy and a friend of mine, but he's representing China and I'm representing the United States. President Xi made a speech 4 days ago where he said that China is going to be opened up, because it's not opened up right now. They trade with us, we can't trade with them. They did $504 billion last year, and we did $120 billion. That's a tremendous imbalance, and we can't have that.
Yeah. The key moment there was when Trump clarified that he represents the United States in trade deals. It's actually good to clarify that. Often I don't know whose side Trump is on from what he says. So it's good that he said, by the way, I do represent the United States here. Sort of a verbal Rorschach test of sorts, right? He later talked about North Korea. I won't subject you to that stuff. And then finally, Emmanuel Macron gets a chance to speak, and I realized in his non-native English, Macron is more articulate and better able to communicate in a sort of reasonable human way than Donald Trump is.
And with that, thank you all very much. Mr. President, would you like to say something?
Thank you, Mr. President, for this word. We will have this enlarged meeting. We will kind of a while together again before the press conference, just to say that we had a very good discussion indeed on Syria, on Iran, the overall region, and some other very important topics regarding our security. And I think we have to work together because we've always worked together on these issues, and it's very important to preserve the stability of this region. And I think what we want to do in the interest of our people is precisely to preserve stability, sovereign states without any hegemony.
There it is. So Emmanuel Macron putting a final point on that, and I decided to wade into online comments about this entire thing. And the Trumpists are just loving it, right? Despite the fact that Trump looks like he just woke up at that table and all of a sudden said, wow, there's cameras here and I should say something. Oh, Trump must be playing 4D chess. It's just unbelievable. Every move he makes is so carefully crafted and just brilliant in every way. So we're not probably going to agree with those folks.
They also liked it when Trump was being adversarial with Macron, so I guess they can have it either way.
Sure.
I mean, before there was like the handshake games.
Yep.
Now there's the kissing,
Yeah,
the grooming. I like it all, really.
They were kissing and grooming each other a lot and holding hands and stuff. It was just every detail down to the smallest minutia. Bizarre and unexplainable in so many ways, and we'll see what the eventual diplomatic repercussions are of this very strange and bizarre visit. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @dpakman. Show's on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Quick break, back after this. Things are really not looking up for Fox News propagandist Sean Hannity, who of course has both radio and television programs, and this actually goes back to our vacation last week when Trump's lawyer Michael Cohen revealed in court, or his lawyers did, that Sean Hannity is a client of Michael Cohen's, which immediately called into question why Hannity didn't disclose that when reporting critically about the way that Cohen was being investigated by Robert Mueller. Hannity also immediately denied that Cohen was his lawyer, which, if you believe the denial, directly implies that perjury took place, that direct lies were told in that courtroom when the claim was made that Cohen represented at some point or currently Sean Hannity. But the broader picture is now becoming more and more clear as we learn, number one, that Donald Trump regularly talks to Sean Hannity, has had him at the White House for dinner, and it's not just a friendly relationship, because we're also learning that Sean Hannity has a sort of mini real estate empire that's connected to Trump administration staffers, including Cabinet Secretary Ben Carson. And part of Hannity's denial of Michael Cohen being his attorney included Hannity saying, quote, "I've said many times on my radio show, I hate the stock market. I prefer real estate. Michael Cohen knows real estate." So basically what Hannity is saying here is Cohen wasn't my lawyer. I was talking to him informally about real estate. And the Guardian started looking into Hannity's real estate holdings. And it turns out that he has a ton of real estate that was not previously reported. And much of that real estate ownership is through shell companies that spend more than, or have spent more than $90 million on nearly 900 homes in 7 states over the last 10 years. And Hannity is the sort of hidden owner of these properties. Many of those properties purchased at a discount in 2013 after a huge string of foreclosures stemming from the mortgage crisis that was going on at the time. And the double standard here of Hannity slamming Obama for what was taking place, despite the fact that it wasn't actually Obama's fault, but personally taking advantage of it and profiting from it, is just disgusting. But that's not all. There's another concerning element here. Hannity was supported by the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, which he did not disclose when he was praising Ben Carson endlessly. Trump's Secretary of Housing and Urban Development is Ben Carson. He's been on Sean Hannity's program before. And some of the properties that Hannity bought, including some in the state of Georgia, were bought with mortgages that the Department of Housing and Urban Development helped Sean Hannity obtain through something called the National Housing Act. And the loans were upped by $5 million with support from none other than Ben Carson's HUD department. Hannity has interviewed Ben Carson and never disclosed his financial interest when talking to Carson about HUD and housing policy. He just praised privatization that Donald Trump and Carson wanted to do. It is all incredibly sketchy. Hannity reports on Michael Cohen without mentioning that Cohen is his attorney or was or is his real estate advisor. Hannity interviews Ben Carson and praises the policy without mentioning that he's working with HUD to obtain gigantic loans to buy properties that he then, I guess, presumably rent out. Hannity also works with a wealth management firm whose principal is Bill Lako, who Hannity has interviewed on his program without disclosing that relationship. And that same Bill Lako wrote op-eds slamming the Robert Mueller investigation and no disclosure whatsoever. Total propagandist and total lack of disclosure. And once again, the guy screaming about corruption by Obama, corruption by Robert Mueller, he's actually the guy covering up the massive conflicts of interest here.
Yeah, and I remember after Trump became president, people started calling Fox News state-run media because they would just parrot whatever the administration's position is. And then later on, we were like, actually, maybe it's media-run state because Trump will get up at 5 in the morning and watch Fox and Friends and then tweet whatever the anchors say and run his policy based on what the anchors on Fox have to say.
Sure.
Now it's like, I don't know which one it is. State-run media, media-run state. It's so intertwined at this point.
It's basically just a melting pot of the two together. And I don't think anybody in our audience is going to be surprised that Hannity's radio and TV programs, not only are they trading in total propaganda, it's actually calculated profiteering for Sean Hannity personally from the propaganda that he puts out. Not at all surprising to me. And at least he's a super nice guy, right? And I still stand by that. When I met Sean Hannity, he was way nicer to me than most of the progressive media people. Tom Hartman was the best, nicest guy. Same thing with Cenk Uygur. But a lot of the progressive media people were really not nice when I met them. And Hannity was a super nice guy.
Did Hannity know your politics, though?
Maybe
he thought you were a conservative.
Didn't matter. Didn't matter. Just was not even an issue.
I wonder if he's sort of playing a character, kind of like he suspects
TV.
Alex Jones of playing.
If he's playing a character, it's one that's very personally profitable for him. So it's an incredibly a valuable business character for him. That's for damn sure. I've got an update for you on a notable 2018 midterm race. It is Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney is the former Massachusetts governor, the former failed presidential candidate, former co-eater of, was it turtle soup or frog's legs or something? Both that he was having with Trump at some restaurant. He's running for U.S. Senator from Utah. Trump has endorsed him. He needs to officially become the Republican nominee for that seat in order to make it to the general election in November of this year. And he has, at least at his first opportunity, failed to secure that nomination. There's actually now going to be a June primary for the race because Mitt Romney failed to get even a plurality of the vote, never mind the 60% that is required to avoid a primary in Utah. State Representative Mike Kennedy got just over 50%. Mitt Romney got just over 49%. And because neither of them got 60%, there is now I guess a real primary has been triggered, for lack of a better term, in June. Stunning for a couple of reasons. Number one is that Trump endorsement aside, Mitt Romney is way, way, way more well-known than State Rep Mike Kennedy. So that raises questions about whether there's sort of resentment in Utah that Romney, I mean, yeah, he has a house in Utah and he's had one there for a long time, but doesn't really live there, sort of like a showing up to run kind of situation, maybe triggering some resentment. That's one possibility. The other angle is that Romney does have the endorsements, not only of the president, Donald Trump, but also of retiring Senator Orrin Hatch, whose seat he's running for, and he still wasn't able to secure the nomination. And when Romney first announced that he was running, he wasn't even expected to have a serious primary challenger. And now he didn't even get a plurality of the vote. And the question I'm most interested in is how prominently is Donald Trump going to campaign for Romney between now and the June primary? Because we know that Trump only likes winners, period. Romney failing to even get a plurality of the vote, and not helpful to Romney is that if he wants Trump's help, he over the weekend refused to say whether he's even supporting Donald Trump for re-election in 2020. You might remember that Donald Trump, either on the day that he was inaugurated or the day after, filed for re-election. And part of it seems to be that that allows him to continue raising money in a particular way. But he's running for re-election is the long and short of it. Romney was asked over the weekend, so are you supporting Donald Trump's candidacy for 2020? And Romney said he's going to be making that decision further down the road. So what can we take from this? Well, number one, Should we deduce that a Democrat has a chance in Utah? No, that is not what this is about. I do not see any path for a Democratic candidate to win a Senate race in very conservative and very, very Mormon Utah. But the signal here is that, number one, a Trump endorsement is not a guarantee of a path, not even to victory overall, but even to a path to Republican nomination. We saw that in Alabama, and we potentially are going to see that in Utah. That's interesting. And number two, seemingly anything could happen in the midterms. Now, yeah, not a Democrat becoming the next senator from Utah, but seemingly almost anything could happen. And that's why people need to vote, right? No matter what state you're in, no matter which race you're talking about, this is going to be a wacky midterm. It is arguably going to come down to voter turnout. And I guess you could say when voter turnout is around 50%, even less in midterms, kind of all comes down to voter turnout. And no matter where you are, don't stay home is the message.
I think there are definitely places where Democrats can win, but Utah I don't think is one of those places.
No.
I know in 2012 when Romney ran against Obama, Romney picked like 72% of the vote. He won that state by a larger margin than any other state.
Yes.
It's just not the right place. And maybe he's losing some support now because there's that Scott Brown effect where people
Yeah.
are saying, you're not really from Utah. But I think he will ultimately win.
You think that Romney is going to take
Oh,
it?
sure. Yeah.
Interesting. Now, I'm wondering, I mean, I guess it's going to have to just be a turnout play, right? Because he didn't even get, it's not like there was some third candidate who took a ton of the vote. There was basically 1% or so in there split up among people that were not Kennedy nor Romney. So do you think that voter turnout's just going to be higher in the June primary and that it's going to disproportionately go to Romney?
I think the name recognition will help Romney. Certainly there are setbacks. I don't think being tied to Trump is a good thing for him.
Yeah.
So he'll want to leave the Trump endorsement at just that tweet and nothing more. And interesting that he's leaving a tepid response and saying that he's not necessarily going to support Trump for 2020.
Yeah.
I think people will just walk on eggshells through this entire race, but he'll skate through and win.
Well, no matter what you say about Utah Mormons, and either one of us could say many, many things, very, very concerning things. What you can say, and we saw this evidenced by the Utah numbers in the 2016 presidential election, Utah Mormons don't love the Trump thing. And Evan McMullin getting significant support in Utah in 2016. And so having, clearly in Utah, more than in many other states, just having a Trump endorsement is not a path to victory, even in the Republican primary. There's this sort of conventional wisdom or common sense, or actually both of those terms often don't make sense, but there is this sort of conventional wisdom that Trump voters made the choice to vote for Donald Trump because of so-called economic anxiety, right? And that in particular, Trump was sort of speaking to the economic anxieties of middle class and often rural white voters to a better degree, to a greater degree than Hillary Clinton did. And so voila, they voted for Donald Trump instead of Hillary Clinton. And the New York Times has a really good report out on a new study by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that points in a very, very different direction, and one that I actually think makes more sense when you really examine it critically, to explain why many Trumpists ended up voting for Donald Trump. And so it is true that according to this study, the white male voting contingent, particularly the white Christian male voting contingent, was moved to vote for Trump, but not by economic anxiety, but instead by fear of losing their status. And the study found that mostly people voted along party lines, as is typically the case in presidential elections. Republicans mostly voted for Donald Trump, Democrats mostly voted for Hillary Clinton, but among independents and among people who cross-voted, meaning Democrats voting for Trump or Republicans voting for Hillary Clinton, those who ended up voting for Donald Trump were disproportionately likely to see their status in society as threatened in some way, more likely to see whites and or Christians and or men as facing new discrimination. And this is not just like a cherry-picked data point, while every other study says no, economic anxiety was the reason. There's another study. The Public Religion Research Institute did a similar survey, and it also found that this contingent of white Christian men were moved to vote for Trump disproportionately because of their fear of being displaced in the culture, which is a very similar result. And when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Did voters really care about bad trade deals per se. They told themselves that they did, even though many of them didn't actually have the economic understanding to really get what it meant. But it's that they saw in Trump the guy that would prevent people in Asia or Hispanics from Latin America from taking their jobs away and thus questioning or putting in peril their status. Asians in factories weren't going to be as likely to take jobs if Donald Trump was the president. Is it because of a nuanced understanding of how Trump would do trade? No, but it's the idea that it would protect their status in society. And when you look at the results and you pair them up with Trump policy ideas, I guess we'd call them very generally policy ideas, although they don't all actually translate to real policy, it makes a lot of sense. There's this sort of psychology of superiority of privilege that exists. And if you see Hispanics or immigrants or minorities, non-Christians, women, if you see them as achieving not superior but equal status in society, comparatively you're losing status, right? And that will influence you to vote for the candidate who you at least perceive might help you maintain that status. This relates to minimum wage phenomenon. One of the income groups, when you do surveys of who supports an increase to the minimum wage and who is against an increase to the minimum wage, it's not the upper middle class that overwhelmingly opposes minimum wage increases. It's not the rich or the ultra rich, although some do oppose it. It's not even often the middle class. The people making just more than minimum wage are one of the groups that most commonly opposes increases to the minimum wage, because what separates them from the minimum wage workers? Not that much in their mind. And it is the exact same psychological phenomenon that we see here among a lot of Trump voters. And by the way, when you look at history and you look at when politics has been done to avoid losing some kind of privileged status, be it a real privileged status or a perceived privileged status, things often don't go well at all. So I think that in addition to the sort of coalescing and catalyzing of a lot of these extremist groups that we've seen under Donald Trump, the idea of people voting to prevent a loss of what they see as a privileged status is also a really concerning thing.
I also wonder how this will influence the Bernie would have won crowd.
Oh,
because
sure.
the idea behind that theory was that Bernie was an economic populist, so he wouldn't have lost those Rust Belt states. Like, he wouldn't have lost Pennsylvania and Michigan because he talked about trade and he talked about NAFTA. But Bernie didn't do that race-baiting stuff. He didn't do that right-wing identity politics. So maybe there's a case to be made that Trump could have beat Bernie too. I don't know.
There is, these numbers certainly go more towards that story than the one that we have heard, which is Bernie definitely would have won. I actually don't know the answer to that because the entire general election campaign would have been very different if Trump was running against Bernie Sanders. So I don't know how useful it is to really speculate about Bernie would have won or Bernie would not have won. I know that I would have voted for Bernie in the general the same way I voted for him in the primary had he been the candidate. I'm going to be very interested to see data from the upcoming midterms outlining what factors motivate voting one way or the other, because you'll have this potential, you've got the economic anxiety narrative, you've got the fear of losing privileged status narrative, and then you also have now the sort of counter-Trump move or influence momentum, which has led to a lot of Democratic wins in special elections over the last year. So certainly midterm 2018 data will be very interesting to look at. I have a story for you today that is both childish and very disturbing, which is actually a surprisingly common combination in the current era. It's being reported that the president is increasingly using his personal mobile phone to call people without Chief of Staff John Kelly knowing about it. And arguably, it's also to get around White House records of the calls that take place. And the sort of immediate obvious question is, who is Trump calling that he doesn't want John Kelly to know about? And what is it that they're talking about during these phone calls? And we know, because multiple sources inside the White House have revealed it, that when Trump uses the White House switchboard system to make calls, it generates a log, it generates a list of calls, that goes to the Chief of Staff. Formerly it was Reince Priebus, now it's John Kelly. When Trump uses his personal cell phone, it is much more difficult for John Kelly to know what's going on unless someone tells him, hey, by the way, Trump called X, Y, or Z. And this is very, very telling, especially when you consider why it was that John Kelly was brought in and some of the changes that happened right after John Kelly was brought in, he came in replacing Reince Priebus and was sort of seen as the guy who was going to get the riffraff out of the Oval Office. Very quickly, Sean Spicer left, Anthony Scaramucci was out, Steve Bannon was gone, and as sources in the White House say, Trump is trying to get Kelly out of the way as a gatekeeper by using his mobile phone and to continue talking to some of these people. There are unrelated reports that say Corey Lewandowski is in touch directly with Trump on his mobile phone. Lewandowski was Trump's former very, very wacky campaign manager, and John Kelly specifically tried to put some distance between Trump and Lewandowski, obviously because Lewandowski is an absolutely terrible influence on Trump. So we have kind of like a political question. The concern politically is who's Trump talking to, what are they talking about, and how is that influencing Trump's position on policy? The legal question is about the White House records and about security concerns. The White House switchboard system is designed for sensitive topics to be discussed. It's a secure system, it is a tracked system, it's logged, and it is private. Is Trump talking about classified information on his personal phone? Because anyone could be taking advantage of the security vulnerabilities on Trump's personal phone, and those conversations would not be logged and captured just for government accountability and transparency. They could also be intercepted by foreign powers or even by American intelligence. And that's sort of where my curiosity is on this thing, right? Number one, could Trump's personal phone be bugged by a foreign intelligence service? That's the obvious question. But question number two about Trump's personal cell phone use is it possible that one of our own intelligence services is surveilling Donald Trump's phone? And this is potentially a major breach of security protocol. And remember, this is the guy who ran on Hillary can't be trusted because of her emails and her email server and documents and Huma Abedin. It's all sloppy and let's lock her up. And as usual, projection. Is there anything the guy accused Hillary or Obama of that he's not doing himself?
Yeah, and as with all things in the Trump administration, it could be a question, too, of if this is incompetence or if it's something nefarious. Because
Absolutely.
maybe he's doing this deliberately. It could be a way to establish a back channel with another entity. Could be the Russians. I don't know. I mean, it gets a little bit conspiratorial, but we just don't know.
Yeah, Pat, all going completely full in on completely unproven conspiracies. But who can blame the guy, right? Because look at what's been going on for the last 15 months. But no, I think that the key question always applies here, which is Donald Trump like the incompetent kid hiding from mommy and using his mobile phone so that John Kelly doesn't get a printout of who he talked to? Or is it actually far more calculated and nefarious? And you never know with Trump.
And what's happened to John Kelly, too? I mean, the guy is a Marine Corps general.
Yeah.
And then he was the director of the Department of Homeland Security.
Super
what a
elegant.
fall from grace. Now he's just a caretaker.
And he might be out soon. And that's actually the next thing that I want to talk about.